Good evening, I'm Esther Gido. You're in for Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Now, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and main opposition presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar are in the home stretch of their election campaign to win the nation's top post. And I think I missed something. So Nigerians in Washington, D.C. are also weighing in on what's going on. But first, we are going to go live to Abuja, where our reporter Grace Alheri Abdu is standing by. Grace, I hope you can hear me. Good evening. Good evening, Grace. Can you hear me? Okay. All right, so we go back to this story here that Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and the main opposition party presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar are in the home stretch of campaign to win the nation's top post. The race is very tight as Saturday's election day draws closer. Both men are Fulani, Hausa-speaking Muslims from north of the country. Now, Nigerians in Washington, D.C. are also weighing in on Saturday's election back home. VOA's Paul Emile Chabrel spoke with some of them. Looks like we're having a little bit of a technical issue here. So we're going to move on to we're going to stay on Nigeria as well, where, all right, I am going to toss to Leno for our health report first, and we'll get back to Nigeria shortly. Leno.
Thank you, Esther. The world commemorated International Epilepsy Day this week to promote awareness of epilepsy around the world. Epilepsy is a neurological disorder in which brain activity becomes abnormal, causing seizures or periods of unusual behavior, sensations, and sometimes loss of awareness. Epilepsy is not contagious. The World Health Organization says about 65 million people around the world have epilepsy, making it one of the most common neurological diseases globally. Nearly 80% of people with epilepsy live in low and middle income countries. About 3/4 of people with epilepsy living in low and middle income countries do not get the treatment they need. About 3.4 million people in the United States have the neurological disorder. Epilepsy is usually treated by medications and in some cases by surgery, devices, or dietary changes. Researchers and doctors are using incredibly tiny particles in the quest to find new ways to fight cancer, and some nanoparticles, just billions of a meter across, are engineered to carry special dye that glows when it hits cancer cells. Oregon State University scientists say this makes it easier for surgeons to find and remove tumors. Irina Matvichak visited Portland and learned that the new procedure is moving closer to testing in human patients. VOA's Anna Rice narrates her report. And today we will discuss epilepsy with our guest, but he is yet to join us. So we will talk to Dr. Edward Bertram very soon about the condition, which, as I mentioned earlier, affects 65 million of people around the world, and most of whom are in low and middle income countries. And some of these patients in low and middle income countries do not have access to the treatment they need. And even diagnosis is a challenge when it comes to epilepsy. Now, when we talk about epilepsy, very often we think about seizures, because people that have epilepsy often have seizures. But epilepsy goes beyond seizures. And we will discuss this today with our guest, Dr. Edward Bertram. He is a neurologist and professor of neurology at the University of Virginia and Secretary General of the International League Against Epilepsy. And he will be joining us soon. We're having some technical difficulties joining Dr. Bertram, I am told. So we will move right along. And that's our health report for today. Esther, back to you.
I think we should talk a little more about epilepsy. I don't know how much experience you had back home. I remember going to middle school and having two of my classmates who had epilepsy. I quite couldn't understand what this was about and what needs to be done. And I know you're not a health expert, but you've been doing some analysis on that. What more can you tell us, Lino, as we try to get the Skype up?
And again, as I mentioned, we will talk to Dr. Edward Bertram. I believe we have him now on the phone. Is Dr. Bertram there?
Can she hear me?
Okay. So, Esther, I'm told we don't have Dr. Bertram there. So it's really a condition, as I mentioned earlier, that is affecting so many people in the world. But unfortunately, it is not as well known as it should be, and it's a neurological disorder, and we just hope to have Dr. Bertram to enlighten us on this condition that affects so many people with very little access to care and prevention. Even diagnosis is a problem in low and middle income countries. So, Esther?
Lino, I know you had prepared a little more on this, and there are so many other health reports that you've covered. Last year, you were out in Ghana, South Africa, and a few other places. What should we expect to hear from you in the coming weeks? So,
working on more stories. One of the stories that I'm working on right now is about the women in northern Ghana, specifically in Tamale. They are the backbone of their communities. They harvest and produce a shea, the shea nuts, from the farm to the cosmetics that we use every day. I use shea butter in my cosmetic product, and many people around the world use shea. And these women are very, very strong. I'm working on the story where they share their stories of economic survival and thriving, really, harvesting shea, transforming it into cosmetics and also edible products. So it's a fascinating story that I will have soon. I also have stories of entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs in Ghana, and that's also something that I'm working on. And to be seen very, very soon on Africa 54.
What was exciting from South Africa, if you can briefly tell us what you saw there?
South Africa was a conference, actually, on business, doing business in Africa with the Africa Development Bank. That also was very interesting.
Thank you, Lino. Well, I am told we have our reporter, Grace Alheri Abdu, in Abuja. Grace, if you can hear me, sorry about the technical issues there. Today, Thursday, is the last day of the campaigns, Grace. What more can you tell us? What are the candidates telling voters in their last-minute, call to woo the voters their way?
Well, as in with all campaigns, what they have been saying all along since the electoral law allows them to start campaigning and going around to conduct rallies, they are just trying to convince the voters that they are the best candidates for them. Today, the two major political parties, as they call them, the big two, that is the APC and the PDP, both party candidates had their rallies in their hometown. President Muhammadu Buhari, who is seeking second term in office, had his rally in Katsina, while Atiku Abubakar had his own in Adamawa. So they had big crowds, and they call them semi-mega rallies because they had their rallies, like the APC had their mega rally yesterday in Abuja.
Now, Grace, what stands out as the major difference between Atiku and Buhari's call to voters? How does their campaign differ?
Well, President Muhammadu Buhari, for one, has said that he is not changing what he stands for since these 4 years. When he started campaigning the last 4 years, his major issues are three. That is economy, corruption, and security. So that is what he has been campaigning over. And then President Atiku, the vice president, former vice president Atiku Abubakar, that is the PDP candidate, is talking about youth employment, is talking about giving women 30%, that is just 5% less than the affirmative action. And he's talking about economy too. He's talking about agriculture. So he has more issues on the table than what President Muhammadu Buhari is saying that he wants to address. That is the three major issues that he's campaigning on: corruption, economy, and security.
But what are the key things that the general population in Nigeria want to see happen with the coming administration?
Well, I think security still remains a very important issue in Nigeria. There's also the issue of poverty, that is unemployment and economy. Those issues are also very, very important in the hearts of people in Nigeria. So those are the issues that you see people talking about. But even though these candidates, each one of them in different ways is talking about addressing those issues, but you can see that when you talk to Nigerians, you will see that depending on which candidates they are routing for, they seem to see one candidate able to address those issues more or better than the other candidates. So those are the issues that Nigerians are talking about.
So what happens tomorrow, Friday, since there are no campaigns? Do the presidential candidates make any calls? Do they go on social media to try to get the last-minute votes? What happens?
Well, since INEC, by the guidelines, they are supposed to stop campaigning tonight, usually they use the last day, which is tomorrow, Friday, to do what I will call their style of door-to-door campaign. Whereas the political parties rally around, major party supporters, what they do, what they've not been able to do in 3 months, that is what they do on the last day. I can tell you that sometimes that last effort is what counts, because what people have been able to do in 3 months, somebody can go and undo it just in 1 day. So that is very, very important. So what they do is they ask every party supporter to just go back to his locality and just convince the people in the community, to go and vote, because they don't stop you from going to your community to, or your supporters to canvass for votes. So that is what they use that last day to do, to just go door to door, house to house, to just convince people that we are the better party and we will be able to deliver more.
Grace, there were some, unsubstantiated claims about what time the polls open on Saturday. Some saying 6 to 2 p.m., others saying 6 to 6 p.m. What is the situation? When do they open? When do they close? And how far do people have to go to vote? Because we know Nigeria, sometimes the traffic is an issue. What happens Saturday?
Yes, as I'm talking to you, I'm right now on INEC website. Mm-hmm. What happens on election day, just like you are asking, election, they open, the voting and accreditation starts at 8 a.m. And then they say that the voting is supposed to start at 2 p.m. But INEC is saying that if voters are on the queue before polls close at 2 p.m., they will be accredited and then they will be also allowed to vote. So that's what INEC is saying.
In terms of logistics,
accreditation and opening starts 8 to 2. But if you are on the line, they allow you to vote. And then, of course, there's restriction of movement. You have to be either a INEC official, election observer, media, essential worker for INEC, which you have to have tag on your vehicle, you have to have accreditation cards with your photographs stamped by INEC before you'll be allowed to move around. So it is expected that every voter should vote within walking distance from his house, otherwise he will not be allowed to vote.
Now, we know that a woman presidential candidate withdrew. What are women expecting from this election, generally?
Well, like I said, what women usually do is to use that advantage to remind the candidates about the 35% affirmative action and, you know, a law or an agreement that Nigeria was a signatory to, but unfortunately in the past they have not been able to achieve that. So what they are trying to do each election season is to remind candidates about that. So this time around they also did that. Whether they will get what they want is yet to be seen. You know, it's something that they will have to wait and see. But I can tell you that Atiku Abubakar is one candidate that has been hammering on that and promising that when he is elected into office, he's going to give the women 30% while giving the youth 40%. So he's more or less leaning on between getting support from the youth and the women.
Now, Grace, you know, both candidates are from the north. And so people are wondering, what are the dynamics here in terms of, you know, trying to make the other people from the southern part of Nigeria and elsewhere to feel that they're included in this election, they're part of Nigeria. How is that going for most electorate? What do they feel?
Well, you know, as you know, President Muhammadu Buhari's vice president is from the south, while Atiku Abubakar picked his vice president from the east. So Atiku Abubakar, in his campaign, he keeps saying that he is a true Nigerian because one of his wives is from the south, one is from the east, and one is from the north. So he talks about him being the true Nigerian and somebody that will accommodate and go with everybody. So being the fact that both candidates are from the north, while they are both from the north, secondly, they are both Muslims, thirdly, they are both Fulanis, so they have, I think, equal advantage as far as the northern parts of Nigeria is concerned. What happens in the east and south and other parts of the country is left to be seen.
Now, Grace, let's talk about Boko Haram, which has been a threat to the country and even the region. What are the two candidates promising in terms of tackling and making sure that Nigerians can say we are free from this militant group?
Well, President Muhammadu Buhari is saying that he's on course. He has been saying that to a large extent he has been able to reduce the attacks of Boko Haram or to push them back from how it was when he came into the office. While Atiku Abubakar is saying that whatever this administration is doing is not working, even though he's accepting the fact that within a period of time there was like less attack, but as you know, even yesterday there was an attack on the convoy of the governor of Borno State. So he is saying that he's going to adopt a different approach so that he will nip this problem in the bud.
Wow, Grace, the other issue of Nigeria, which, you know, most Nigerians feel so bad about, is when they're associated with corruption. Now, what are the two candidates promising to do about corruption, and how do their campaign policies in terms of fighting corruption differ?
Well, President Muhammadu Buhari has been saying that that is one thing that he campaigned and promised Nigerians that he's going to do, and he's doing just that within the last 3.5 years since he came into the office, and it's something that he wants to see continue if elected for the second term. While, on the other hand, Atiku Abubakar is saying that corruption is a symptom of something. And so he is saying that if people are well educated, if people have employment, if people have the right policies put in place, there will be less corruption. So that is what he's trying to address. He wants to address the causes of corruption. That's the difference between the two political parties. But both of them agree that there's corruption in Nigeria, and each one of them is trying to solve that problem in a different way.
Well, you mentioned unemployment, and that has been an issue not only in Nigeria but elsewhere. But in terms of youth employment, what are they promising? Because the larger population of Nigeria are the youth.
Well, I can tell you that you remember this not too young to run law that has been signed in Nigeria. So, but Atiku Abubakar is saying that even though he knows that he does not belong, to that category of the youth, if, going by the definition of who a young person is, he is promising that if elected into office, he's going to make sure that 40% of people in government, people that is going to bring in government appointees, political appointees are going to be used. As a matter of fact, he's saying that if he has a minister of state who is an older person, he's going to give a younger person minister of state. That way, one, the young people will get employed, and then they will also be the ones to bring up and give opportunity to younger ones, because like they're saying, he who feels it knows it. Mm-hmm. So he's saying that that is one way of bringing the youth into governance and drawing them close so that they will be able to help their fellow youth.
Right, Grace.
And he also talks about gainful employment.
Right, Grace, thank you so much. Many, many thanks to you for bringing us up to speed with what's going on in Nigeria. That is Grace Alheri Abdu reporting for us from Abuja. And we are going to go back to my colleague, Lino Mudu. Lino, back to you.
Thank you, Esther. Now we are joined via phone by Dr. Edward Bertram. He is a neurologist and professor of neurology at the University of Virginia and Secretary General of the International League Against Epilepsy. Dr. Bertram, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving us this chance to talk some about epilepsy.
Absolutely. Listen, when we hear about epilepsy, we often think about seizures, which is really a characteristic of the condition. But talk to us about this disease and the fact that it's not just about seizures, right?
Correct. I mean, when everybody thinks about epilepsy, what they always picture is somebody falling down and getting stiff all over and jerking in a grand mal seizure is what a lot of people call them. Mm-hmm. And that's a very scary thing to see. But there are lots of other different types of seizures in which people will just sometimes stare. The typical one that people always think about is what are called petit mal or absent seizures in children with the fluttering eyes. But it really is, the seizure is really just it's a few minutes, and sometimes it happens every few months or even less than that. But the impact of epilepsy on a person's life is huge in terms of how they're perceived and what they're allowed to do in many countries. So as we say now, epilepsy is more than just seizures.
So what causes epilepsy? Is it a genetic condition? Is it something that one can develop over the years?
There are lots of causes. And although there are clearly some forms of epilepsy which have a major component of genetics, and there are really clearly some genetic causes of epilepsy. Many other people get it for other reasons. Sometimes if there is in a child, if there is an injury at birth, or if someone has an infection around the brain, this will cause damage, which can sometimes lead to seizures. Sometimes when the brain is developing, there are a few areas that just don't quite form correctly, and that little spot can cause seizures, and that's all that it does. And then as people go through life, brain injuries will cause seizures as well, and aging can also bring on epilepsy. So the causes of epilepsy vary a little bit by the age of the person. Typically, epilepsy is thought of as a childhood disease and not much after that, but in fact, the elderly are also very prone to epilepsy as well. So it's again, there are a lot of different causes, and one of the things that we look for when someone comes to us with possible epilepsy is what's causing the seizure to happen. And
so talk to us about management, given that there are different ways that the disease develops. What about treatment and management? How do they differ according to the type?
Well, there are certain types, such as the childhood absence seizure, which is, again, the child will have these frequent brief staring spells, and there's a very specific choice of medicines that you want to use. Other than that, really, the medicines that are available for most of the other types of seizures are roughly equal, and it's a matter of just recognizing that the symptoms that somebody are having are the symptoms of a seizure, and then choosing which medicine best fits that particular patient. There's no best medicine for epilepsy in most cases. It's the one that works for the patient and also the one that the patient can have access to, which is also a big issue in many parts of the world. People just can't get to the medicines that would be helpful to them.
Dr. Bertram, before we wrap, what are the biggest challenges and what do you hope to see in the management of epilepsy in general?
I think the biggest challenges we have, first of all, are recognizing that someone has epilepsy. But in many parts of the world, it is simply getting access to appropriate treatment. In many cultures around the world, epilepsy is not viewed as a medical condition, but more of a spiritual situation. And it makes sense in many ways. Most people think of disease as something that you have. It happens and goes on for some days or weeks or months, sometimes more seriously, but then it's over. But epilepsy is something which happens briefly and then goes away for a while and then happens again. And in many parts of the world, this is sort of viewed more as some sort of a sign of a spiritual event. And perhaps the biggest challenge we have in getting treatment to many people is just for them to recognize that there is a medical treatment for it. This is a medical condition, and that there are medicines for it. But that's a long education process because people believe in certain things in terms of what causes epilepsy, and it's much more difficult to them, for us, to educate them otherwise. So the biggest challenge, perhaps, everywhere is just education, getting people to know that there are treatments and that it is a medical condition. Okay. And then the second big challenge is, in many places, is just having the medicines available. In many countries of the world, medicines are not available or not available regularly because people have to take their medicines every day. So those are the two big challenges. Okay,
and last, Dr. Bertram, talk to us briefly about how the International League Against Epilepsy helped. Well, we have to leave it there, actually. That's all the time we have. Dr. Bertram, thank you so much for joining us. And that was that was Dr. Edward Bertram, Secretary General of the International League Against Epilepsy. That's our help report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter, @LenorMoudou. Esther?
Lenore, thank you very much for today. And so that's our show for today. Good night from Washington.